On the gray Monday morning of 1st October 1934, in the drawing room of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney's old Westbury estate on Long Island, a 10-year-old girl stands on tiptoe to arrange a vase of white roses. Reporters are already gathering at the courthouse in Manhattan. Her name is on every front page as the poor little rich girl. A maid smooths the bow at the back of Gloria Vanderbilt's dress while her aunt reminds her, gently but firmly, how to sit, how to fold her hands, how to answer when the judge asks where she wants to live. In later years, Gloria will remember that morning as a rehearsal. Silence for her mother, gratitude for her aunt, composure for the cameras. On a side table lies a society photograph clipped from the papers, Gloria between her mother and aunt, the caption already outdated by the coming trial. As the car waits to take her to the Supreme Court in New York, she touches one of the roses, pricks her finger on a hidden thorn, and says nothing. The child is exquisitely prepared. The cost of that preparation is still unfolding. In late February 1924, in a hospital in New York City, Gloria Laura Vanderbilt was born to Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, great-grandson of railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt, and his second wife, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, a teenager barely 19 years old herself. The birth announcement appears in New York Society pages alongside reports of new Fifth Avenue construction and upcoming Newport season preparations, placing the infant squarely within America's most conspicuous dynasty, though by 1924, that dynasty's fortune had already been substantially dispersed among heirs and diminished by poor investments and extravagant spending. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, known as Reggie to his social circle, represents the third generation of Vanderbilt wealth, far enough removed from Commodore Cornelius's ruthless railroad empire to have inherited money but not the discipline that created it. By the time of his daughter's birth, he had already spent much of his share of the family fortune on horses, cars, women, and alcohol. His marriage to Gloria Morgan, a young woman whose family claims aristocratic European connections, but whose actual social standing is more aspirational than established, is his second, following a divorce from Kathleen Nielsen, with whom he had one daughter. The infant, Gloria Laura, named for her mother and grandmother, enters a world where Vanderbilt's name still commands attention in society columns, but where the actual fortune attached to that name is rapidly evaporating. The family's Newport cottage has been sold. Reggie's spending continues unchecked. His health deteriorates under the strain of alcoholism that has progressed from social drinking to medical crisis. 18 months after Gloria's birth, in September 1925, Reginald Vanderbilt died at Sandy Point Farm in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, of what death certificates describe as cirrhosis of the liver and related complications. He is only 45 years old. His will, probated in New York Surrogate's Court, reveals both the extent of his debts and the structure he has created, whether intentionally or accidentally, that will shape his infant daughter's entire life. Court documents show that after debts are settled, Gloria is left with a trust fund valued at approximately $2.5 million, an enormous sum by Depression-era standards, yielding several $1,000s monthly in income. The trust is structured so that Gloria will not gain control until she reaches adulthood. Until then, her mother serves as administrator, her spending subject to review by the Surrogate's Court and various appointed trustees who must approve major expenditures. The narrator observes that while at the center of Reggie Vanderbilt's will lies a paradox that will define his daughter's childhood. She is legally wealthy beyond most people's imagination, but practically powerless, her fortune simultaneously her inheritance and her cage. Money has been placed in her name, but all decisions about that money, and by extension, about her life, will be made by others. She is an heiress who owns nothing, a millionaire who must ask permission, a Vanderbilt whose fortune makes her both precious and prisoner. In later memoirs and authorized biographies, Gloria will describe her father as a romantic absence, someone she barely remembers except through stories told by others and the few photographs preserved in family albums. But his legacy is concrete, the trust fund that makes her the object of legal battles, society fascination, and family struggle for the next decade and beyond. The fortune that was meant to secure her future ensures instead that she will always be someone else's responsibility, someone else's asset, someone else's concern, never simply herself. By 1927, Society columns had substantially rebranded the widowed Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt. Where she had been Mrs. Reginald Vanderbilt, widow, she becomes the glamorous young widow Morgan Vanderbilt, her youth and presumed beauty making her story more interesting to readers than simple mourning would allow. Probate records filed in New York show her appointed as administrator of her daughter's trust, a position that requires court approval for expenditures beyond routine living expenses. But that also provides her with income for the child's maintenance and her own support as guardian. The financial arrangement is complex and will later become contested. Gloria Morgan receives an allowance from the trust for maintaining herself and the child in appropriate style, but the exact boundaries of appropriate remain vague, subject to interpretation and dispute. Does transatlantic travel constitute a necessary expense for the child's health and education? Or is it the mother's pleasure disguised as parental duty? The question will be argued in court, but for now, in the late 1920s, the checks are issued and the spending continues. Shipping manifests and passport records held in various archives trace a familiar arc of elite leisure that accelerates after Reggie's death. Paris in spring, where they stay at the Ritz or in rented apartments in the 16th arrondissement. Biarritz in summer, joining the international set at the casino and beaches, London for the season when appropriate, Cannes and Monte Carlo when fashion dictates. The young widow and her small daughter, accompanied always by Gloria's maternal grandmother Laura Kilpatrick Morgan, and by the child's beloved nanny Emma Dodo Sullivan Kieslick, move through grand hotels and rented villas in a continuous circuit of fashionable displacement. Little Gloria, as she is known in newspapers and family correspondence to distinguish her from her mother, experiences childhood as a series of hotel suites and pension drawing rooms, of train compartments and ocean liner staterooms, of temporary spaces made briefly home-like by Dodo's presence and familiar routines. In each new place, Dodo unpacks the child's toys, arranges her clothes in unfamiliar wardrobes, creates small rituals of consistency, bedtime stories, afternoon walks, and the daily practice of writing thank you notes on monogram stationery. The teaching of letter writing begins early and is both genuinely pedagogical and symbolically significant. Dodo guides the child's hand over the paper, helping her form the looping G of Gloria, the careful spelling of dear and thank you and love. The exercise is framed as good manners, the kind of skill any well-brought-up child must master. But it also serves another purpose. The notes smooth over absences, explain away neglect, maintain appearances of maternal attention that the child herself rarely experiences directly. Biographers working from family papers and court documents describe a childhood of velvet coats and ocean crossings, of being displayed in hotel lobbies and then returned to nursery rooms, of seeing her mother primarily at scheduled times, tea time appearances when the child is brought down, cleaned and dressed, to be admired briefly before being sent back upstairs. The pattern is not unusual for wealthy families of the era, but it is extreme, shaped by Gloria Morgan's youth, her own uncertainties about motherhood, and her increasing absorption in a social life that has little room for a small child's needs. Court petitions filed years later with the New York Surrogates Court seeking approval for various expenditures reveal how expenses are justified. Travel is for the child's health. European residence is educational. The constant movement is characterized as necessary for a girl of her station. The language is careful, constructed to satisfy legal requirements while enabling the lifestyle Gloria Morgan wants. Whether the child herself benefits from this arrangement is a question not yet formally asked, though it simmers beneath the surface of family relationships. The narrator reflects that, from the very start, the etiquette of letters teaches little Gloria how to appear grateful for choices she did not make, to express pleasure she may not feel, to perform connection with a mother who is often absent. The notes, carefully preserved in family papers and later entered as evidence in legal proceedings, will eventually be read in court, Some cite it as proof of the child's proper upbringing, others as evidence of emotional neglect disguised by pretty words. While the Morgans circle Europe in their continuous itinerary of fashionable resorts and rented accommodations, another branch of the Vanderbilt family watches from established roots in New York and Long Island. At Westbury House, her palatial estate on the north shore of Long Island, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, daughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, prominent sculptor, art patron, and founder of what will become the Whitney Museum of American Art, receives regular reports about her late brother-in-law's family. The reports come from various sources: family members who encounter Gloria Morgan in European capitals, financial advisors who review quarterly trust statements, private investigators whose services wealthy families routinely employ when concerned about relatives' behavior. What these reports describe troubles Gertrude: couture bills charged to the child's allowance, hotel accounts that suggest her mother rarely spends time in the same suite as her daughter, steamship manifests showing constant transatlantic crossings funded by trust income, rumors of parties and romantic entanglements that seem incompatible with serious motherhood. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney herself represents a different model of how inherited wealth can be deployed. Born in 1875 to one of America's richest families, she married into further wealth when she wed Harry Payne Whitney, heir to railroad and streetcar fortunes. But rather than simply spending her money on pleasure, she became a serious sculptor, studied in Paris, established studios, and created public monuments, including the Titanic Memorial in Washington, D.C. By the early 1930s, she was using her wealth to support American artists, having founded the Whitney Studio Club in 1918, which would evolve into the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1931. Her correspondence and later biographies portray a woman torn between genuine concern for her niece and the class prejudices of her generation. She is disturbed by evidence that little Gloria is being raised without proper supervision, that the child's fortune is being used to support her mother's social life rather than the child's welfare. But she is also troubled, perhaps more viscerally, by the idea that a Vanderbilt heiress is being raised outside the ordered, disciplined domesticity that Gertrude associates with proper child rearing and family duty. The distinction matters. Is Gertrude motivated primarily by love for her niece or by horror at how Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt represents declining standards among the family's newer members? The answer is probably both, tangled together in ways Gertrude herself might not be able to separate. She sees a child being neglected. She also sees a Vanderbilt name being misused. The two concerns reinforce each other, building toward intervention. By 1932, as the Depression deepens and public fascination with the very rich takes on harder, more judgmental edges, correspondence between Gertrude and James A. Foley, a New York surrogate's court judge who serves as one of the trust administrators, shows mounting alarm about what Gertrude terms the child's moral and physical welfare. The language is careful, legally precise, but the meaning is clear. Gertrude believes her niece is in danger, that Gloria Morgan is failing as a mother, that intervention is necessary. Plans begin to form quietly, discreetly, as such plans always do among the wealthy who prefer to handle family matters through lawyers rather than public confrontation. Gertrude's attorneys research custody law, investigating what grounds might justify removing a child from a mother's care, what evidence would be required, what arguments might prove persuasive to judges and public opinion. The machinery of legal action begins turning, slowly at first, building momentum toward a confrontation that will explode into headlines. The narrator observes that in families where millions are recorded in ledgers down to the penny, where trust statements track every expenditure, affection itself begins appearing as a legal claim, love becomes evidence to be weighed in court. The questions that might be resolved through conversation in other families: is the child happy? Is she being properly cared for? What arrangement serves her best becomes instead matters for lawyers, judges, newspaper reporters, and ultimately the fascinated public to decide. Somewhere between Gertrude's genuine concern and her class-bound assumptions about proper motherhood, between Gloria Morgan's youth and her real affection for her daughter mixed with her equally real desire for adult pleasures, A decision is made that will transform a private family dispute into what newspapers will soon call the trial of the century, turning a 10-year-old girl into both symbol and pawn in a battle about money, motherhood, and the meaning of privilege in Depression America. In the early 1930s, as legal tensions build toward open conflict, but before the custody battle becomes public, little Gloria's education follows the pattern common to wealthy American families with European aspirations. School records and family accounts place her in a succession of European convent schools, institutions that combine religious instruction with the social training considered appropriate for girls of her class. The convents, typically run by French or Belgian orders, enforce rigorous daily schedules: early morning mass, breakfast in silence, academic lessons in French and English, music practice in Ein Chansonnier. The afternoon, carefully supervised recreation, evening prayers. The nuns who teach her correct her posture as carefully as they correct her grammar, enforce quiet as a virtue, and reward perfect penmanship in multiple languages. Letters home, later quoted in biographies and some entered as evidence during the custody trial, are neat, controlled, filled with dutiful phrases that reveal little of her actual emotional state. Dear Mother, thank you for the lovely gift. I am working very hard at my lessons. The sisters are very kind. I hope to see you soon. With love, Gloria. The formula rarely varies. The feelings beneath the formula remain hidden, perhaps even from the child herself, who is learning that certain things are simply not said, that emotions must be translated into acceptable forms before they can be expressed at all. Yet most of the emotional education happens not in convent classrooms, but in hotel rooms and rented apartments during breaks from school, where Dodo continues the more intimate work of training Gloria in how to behave around her mother. The lessons are specific and repeated. Stand up straight when mother enters the room, walk forward calmly to kiss her cheek. Say thank you for whatever gift she has brought. Answer questions briefly but pleasantly. Do not cry or complain. Do not ask why she has been away so long. Do not ask when she will come back. These are lessons in managing disappointment, in performing affection that may or may not be reciprocated, in protecting oneself through careful control of expression and reaction. The training is not cruel. Dodo loves the child and wants to help her navigate a difficult situation, but it is fundamentally about teaching Gloria to suppress her own needs and feelings in service of maintaining surface harmony. In photographs from these years, preserved in family albums and later reproduced in biographies and documentaries, the child appears exactly as she has been trained to appear, hands folded just so, white cuffs immaculate against dark velvet dresses, posture perfect, expression composed. She looks like a small aristocrat, which is precisely what she has been taught to be. What the photographs cannot show is the loneliness beneath the composure, the confusion of a child who sees her mother rarely and unpredictably, who cannot understand why she is so often left with servants while adults pursue pleasures elsewhere. In later interviews given decades after childhood, Gloria will describe feeling like a visitor in her mother's glamorous world, always slightly uncertain of her welcome, always performing the role of charming daughter without quite feeling like anyone's daughter at all. She is learning to be observed rather than to observe, to please rather than to be pleased, to arrange herself decoratively in whatever scene adults have constructed. The narrator reflects that finishing school begins long before any formal institution bears that name. It begins in hotel, rooms where children practice gratitude for absent parents, in convent corridors where silence is enforced as virtue, in the hundreds of small adjustments and corrections that teach a girl how to make herself acceptable, pleasing, unthreatening, how to become, in essence, an object to be displayed rather than a subject with her own desires and needs. When these lessons moved from private spaces to a very public courtroom in 1934, those same skills, the ability to sit still, to answer questions calmly, to appear composed under scrutiny, were transformed from social graces into legal evidence. Her credibility before the judge will depend significantly on how well she has learned to perform the role of well-mannered child. The very training that has suppressed her authentic feelings will be cited as proof of her good character, Her testimony weighted by her ability to display exactly the kind of controlled emotion that years of coaching have produced. The paradox is almost perfect. The child whose real feelings have been systematically trained out of her will be asked to testify about where she truly wants to live, and her answer will be judged credible precisely because she has learned to say what adults want to hear, performed in ways adults find convincing. The performance and the person have become so entangled that separating them may be impossible, perhaps even for Gloria herself. By September 1934, the conflict that had been building privately for months turned suddenly explosively public. Legal filings preserved in New York court archives show Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt petitioning the New York Supreme Court to regain full custody of her daughter, who has been staying with Gertrude Whitney for what was initially framed as a temporary summer visit. Gertrude counters with a formal custody petition of her own, supported by affidavits from servants, testimony from family members, and reports from private investigators documenting what they characterize as Gloria Morgan's unfit behavior. The legal battle is immediately understood by all parties as being about more than just a child's living arrangements. Control of Gloria means influence over her fortune, access to her trust income, and, perhaps more importantly in a family obsessed with reputation, authority to define what Vanderbilt name means and who properly represents it. The fight is simultaneously about genuine love for a child and about power, money, image, and class identity. At Old Westbury, as lawyers prepare their arguments and publicists begin managing the inevitable press attention, the 10-year-old heiress at the center of the dispute becomes the subject of a different kind of education. Family members and attorneys, working with the awkward combination of genuine concern and strategic calculation, begin coaching her on how to speak to Justice John F. Carew when he interviews her in chambers. Later accounts, including Gloria's own memoirs written decades afterward, reveal the substance of this coaching. She should answer questions softly and clearly, should look the judge in the eye to demonstrate sincerity, should explain that she feels most at home with Aunt Gertrude. The language is carefully chosen, not "I love my aunt more than my mother," which would sound cruel and coached, but "I feel at home here," which suggests comfort, stability, proper care without explicitly condemning Gloria Morgan. The coaching includes reassurance about Dodo, whose possible dismissal the child fears above almost anything else. Gloria is apparently told that if she chooses to live with Aunt Gertrude, her beloved nanny will come too, that nothing in her daily life will change except that she will be secure, safe, properly cared for. Whether the adults making these promises fully intend to keep them, or whether they are simply saying what the child needs to hear to secure her cooperation, will become devastatingly clear later. On the morning of 1st October 1934, as in the opening portrait, the final preparations proceed with the choreography of a theater production. A maid adjusts Gloria's dress, smooths the bow at her back, makes sure her white socks are perfectly straight, and her Mary Jane shoes polished to gleaming. Her aunt speaks to her quietly, reminding her one last time, "Just tell the judge what you really feel, darling. Where do you feel most at home?" In a moment of unusual agency or perhaps simply childish restlessness, Gloria is asked to arrange flowers in the sitting room while adults confer in another space. She stands on tiptoe to place white roses in a crystal vase, adjusting them carefully, creating small order in a morning of adult chaos. The gesture calms her, occupies her hands, gives her something to control when everything else in her life is being decided by others. The narrator observes that the space between what a child is told to do and what that choice will cost her is the real distance being traversed in this elegant house. Gloria is being asked to choose between her mother and her aunt, but the choice has already been shaped by months of subtle and not so subtle influence. She is being asked to testify about her true feelings, but her feelings have been formed by years of training in how to please adults, how to say what will make them happy, how to suppress her own confusion and fear in favor of producing the responses others want. When the car arrives to take her to the New York Supreme Court building in Manhattan, she walks out of Westbury House already knowing, at some level, what answer she is expected to give. The question is not whether she will give it. She's 10 years old, trained to obedience, surrounded by powerful adults who have clear preferences, but what that answer will cost her, and whether she will ever be able to separate what she was told to want from what she actually wanted, if those two things were ever distinguishable at all. From 1st October through 21st November 1934, the matter of Vanderbilt unfolds in a wood-paneled courtroom in the New York Supreme Court building on Foley Square in Lower Manhattan as newspapers from coast to coast print daily summaries, editorial commentary, and increasingly sensational details. The trial becomes a national spectacle, combining elements that Depression-era Americans find irresistible: vast inherited wealth at a time when millions are unemployed, family dysfunction among the supposedly superior classes, and the question of what makes a good mother when money removes all practical obstacles to child rearing. Reporters describe the small, pale girl with dark hair sitting very straight in the courtroom, watching while adults debate her mother's morality in language supposedly veiled but actually quite explicit. The testimony includes allegations of late-night parties where liquor flowed despite prohibition, suggestions of an engagement to Prince Gottfried of Hohenlohe-Langenburg that would take Gloria to Germany, and the most explosive charge, rumors, supported by servant testimony, of an inappropriate relationship between Gloria Morgan and Lady Nadeda, Nada Mountbatten, Marchioness of Milford Haven, when a French maid named Marie Caillat testifies that she witnessed Gloria Morgan and Lady Milford Haven in bed together, wearing silk pajamas, reading magazines. The courtroom erupts. Justice Carew briefly clears the press from the room, but the scandal is already headline news. The words unnatural relationship and moral turpitude appearing in newspapers nationwide. The testimony is devastating not just because of its sexual implications, which many readers understand imperfectly or refuse to acknowledge, but because it paints Gloria Morgan as fundamentally unsuitable for motherhood by the standards of 1934 America. The child herself testifies in chambers, away from the press and most spectators. Press accounts later report, based on leaks and official summaries, that she tells Justice Carew she is lonely with her mother and wants to stay with her aunt, words she will later, as an adult giving interviews and writing memoirs, say she was extensively coached to say. Whether her testimony reflects her genuine feelings, her response to coaching, or some mixture of both becomes impossible to determine, perhaps even for Gloria herself. Outside the courthouse, newsboys shout, "Poor little rich girl," using the phrase that has already become attached to her story, borrowed from a popular song and earlier applied to other wealthy unfortunates, now permanently associated with Gloria Vanderbilt. The phrase is both sympathetic and condescending, positioning her as a victim while also suggesting that her suffering is somehow less real because of her wealth, that money should compensate for emotional deprivation or family dysfunction. Inside the courtroom, Gloria sits very straight, hands folded exactly as she has been taught, watching her mother cry and her aunt maintain stern composure. She wears a dark velvet dress with white collar and cuffs, dark stockings, polished shoes, dressed to appear both properly childish and appropriately serious. Her appearance, like her testimony, has been carefully managed to produce specific impressions. This is a well-cared-for child. Say her clothes and posture. This is a child who needs protection, says her small size and pale face. The narrator reflects that in this improvised finishing school of a public trial, truth and performance are graded on the same scale. Gloria's credibility depends not on the authenticity of her feelings, but on how convincingly she performs the role of honest child. Her mother's fitness is judged not primarily on her actual care of her daughter, but on how well she conforms to idealized images of motherhood that Depression-era Americans hold. Gertrude's suitability is measured not by love, but by wealth, stability, and adherence to proper social forms. The trial reveals but also creates reality. It takes a private family dispute, complicated, ambiguous, without clear villains, and transforms it into public morality play with defined roles: the good aunt protecting an innocent child, the bad mother pursuing selfish pleasures, the helpless heiress caught between them. The narrative is too simple to be accurate, but it is compelling enough to convince Justice Carew and the millions of Americans following the case in newspapers. When the verdict comes on the 21st November 1934, it will redefine not only who has custody of Gloria, but what good motherhood means in the public imagination, what duties the wealthy owe to their children, and how family conflicts should be resolved when millions of dollars are at stake. The decision will be legally final but emotionally incomplete, answering the question of where Gloria will live while leaving unresolved the question of where she belongs and whether anyone involved truly understands what she needs. In late November 1934, Justice John F. Carew issued his decision. Custody of Gloria Laura Vanderbilt is awarded primarily to her aunt Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, with limited supervised visitation granted to her mother Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt. The ruling cites concerns for the child's welfare, finding that residence with her aunt provides greater stability, more appropriate moral environment, and better protection for her interests. Legal language that translates roughly to, the court believes Gertrude will be a better mother than Gloria's actual mother. For Gloria Morgan, the verdict is devastating. She has lost not just custody, but public reputation. Her name now permanently associated with images of failed motherhood, with suggestions of scandalous behavior that will follow her for the rest of her life. For Gertrude, the verdict is vindication, confirming her view that intervention was necessary and proper, that she has rescued her niece from an unsuitable situation. For 10-year-old Gloria herself, the consequences are both official and brutally personal. The court's decision means she will live at Old Westbury and Gertrude's other properties, attend schools chosen by her aunt, spend holidays and summers under Gertrude's supervision. Her mother will visit according to schedules set by the court, always supervised, their relationship now mediated by lawyers and judges, rather than conducted with whatever spontaneity or intimacy might have once existed. But the most immediate and traumatic consequence of the verdict is completely unexpected by the child. Court orders require that Dodo, the nanny who has been Gloria's primary source of love and stability throughout her chaotic childhood, be dismissed. The reasoning, explained in legal memoranda and later recounted in biographies, is that Dodo has become too enmeshed in the family conflict, too identified with Gloria Morgan's side, too much a source of divided loyalty for the child. Biographers describing this moment, drawing on Gloria's own later accounts and contemporary documentation, portray a scene of devastating abandonment. The child screaming and clinging to her nanny as Dodo is physically removed from the house, Gloria's desperate cries ignored by adults who insist this separation is for her own good, that she will adjust, that she will eventually understand this is necessary. The image, a 10-year-old girl being forcibly separated from the person she loves most, echoes through decades of Gloria's later life, appearing in interviews, memoirs, and conversations with her own children as the worst thing that happened to her as a child, worse even than the trial itself. The cruelty is unintentional but absolute. The same adults who promised Gloria that if she chose Aunt Gertrude, she would keep Dodo have now decided that Dodo must go, that the promise was never meant to be permanent, that circumstances require this additional loss. Whether they deliberately misled her or simply failed to anticipate how the custody arrangement would actually work, the result is the same: betrayal compounded with grief. In the quiet that follows, after Dodo has left, after the reporters have moved on to other stories, after the courtroom drama has concluded, Gloria wanders the long halls of Old Westbury, where freshly arranged flowers appear in crystal vases, each morning placed by servants she barely knows. She no longer arranges them herself. That was a child's occupation, and she is being trained now to be something else, something more distant and controlled. The narrator observes that the trial has answered the legal question of where Gloria will live, has determined which adult has authority over her upbringing, and has established mechanisms for managing her fortune. But it has not answered, cannot answer, the deeper question of where she truly belongs or with whom. She has been placed with her aunt not because the connection between them is strong, but because the court judged her mother unsuitable. She has lost both, parents in different ways. Her mother to scandal and restricted visitation, her father to death before she could know him, and now Dodo, who was more parent to her than either biological parent, to legal maneuvering and adult decisions made without regard for a child's emotional needs. As legal and financial supervision of Gloria and her fortune tightens under Gertrude's management and court oversight, plans begin forming for the next phase of her upbringing. Formal education at institutions designed to transform wealthy girls into polished young women, the architecture of refinement that will attempt to create from this traumatized child an acceptable version of a Vanderbilt heiress. By the late 1930s, school records and biographical accounts place Gloria Vanderbilt at a succession of elite educational institutions: the Greenvale School on Long Island, then Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut, and later the Wheeler School in Providence, Rhode Island. These are schools designed specifically for girls of her class, places where daughters of wealthy families learn not just academic subjects, but the more subtle curriculum of how to be appropriately refined young women destined for prestigious colleges, cultured marriages, and positions of social influence. At Greenvale School, a small private day school on Long Island's North Shore, serving children of the wealthy families who maintain estates in the area, Gloria attends classes with children whose parents know her story from newspapers but have been instructed not to discuss it. Teachers remember her in later interviews as quiet, intensely private, someone who participates when called upon but volunteers little, who keeps her thoughts largely to herself. The curriculum at schools like Greenvale and later at Miss Porter's emphasizes traditional academic subjects: literature, languages, mathematics, sciences, but also includes extensive training in arts, music, and deportment. Girls learn to ride properly, to play piano or another appropriate instrument, to speak French with acceptable accent, to write clear, graceful English prose. They are being prepared not for professional careers, which remain largely unimaginable for girls of their class in the 1930s, but for lives as cultured wives, charitable volunteers, perhaps writers or artists if they have talent, and their families permit such pursuits. At Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut, where Gloria spends several terms, the atmosphere combines academic rigor with social exclusivity. The school, founded in 1843, has educated generations of wealthy American girls, creating networks of connection that last lifetimes. Classmates include daughters of prominent families from across the country, girls who will marry into other prominent families, who will maintain the social structures that define American upper-class life. Contemporary accounts and later reminiscences describe Gloria as shy, watchful, someone who has perfect posture and impeccable manners, but who seems to be observing from a slight distance, never quite fully present in the moment. Her famous name makes her an object of curiosity and sometimes envy, but it also isolates her, marking her as different even in a school full of privileged girls. During summers and holidays at Old Westbury and at Gertrude's New York properties, Gloria receives another kind of education. She observes her aunt at work in her sculpture studio, watches artists and intellectuals gather for salons and discussions, visits the Whitney Museum to see exhibitions her aunt has organized. Gertrude, whatever her limitations as a substitute mother, genuinely believes in art and culture as serious pursuits, not mere decoration, and she exposes Gloria to a world where creativity is valued and patronage of artists is understood as responsibility, not charity. In this environment, Gloria begins developing her own artistic interests, sketching and painting in notebooks, observing how artists work, absorbing ideas about form and color and expression that will later shape her own career. The cultivation is not systematic or formal. Gertrude is busy with her own work and the museum, but it provides exposure to possibilities beyond simply being a wealthy ornament. Throughout these years, the habit of arranging flowers persists. In dorm rooms at Miss Porter's, in her bedroom at Old Westbury, Gloria creates small compositions with whatever materials are available: wildflowers picked during walks, roses from the estate gardens, even leaves and branches when nothing else is at hand. The activity is simultaneously aesthetic practice, learning about color and form, and emotional management, a way of creating small zones of control and beauty in a life that has often felt chaotic and determined by others. The narrator reflects that the same disciplines that trained Gloria to sit still under cross examination in court now make her legible as a refined young woman in school. Her ability to be quiet, to appear composed, to perform grace under observation, all skills learned through trauma and coaching, serve her well in educational institutions that value exactly these qualities. The line between survival skill and social grace is so thin as to be invisible, even to Gloria herself, who cannot always tell the difference between what she has genuinely learned and what she has been trained to perform. When she leaves school early, before graduating, to marry at 17, it will be with all the outward polish these institutions promise to provide: fluent French, perfect posture, cultural sophistication, and many of the internal doubts and wounds still unhealed, still shaping her choices in ways she is only beginning to understand. In December 1941, at age 17, Gloria Vanderbilt left school and married Pasquale Pat DiCicco in Santa Barbara, California, a union that is widely reported in entertainment press and society columns as both romantic breakthrough and worrying sign. DiCicco, born Pasquale DiCicco, is a Hollywood agent and businessman over a decade older than his teenage bride, known for his connections in the film industry and his friendship with various celebrities and underworld figures. The marriage represents Gloria's first major act of apparent autonomy, her escape from Gertrude's supervision into a life of her own choosing. In later interviews, particularly those with her son Anderson Cooper, documented in the film Nothing Left Unsaid, Gloria describes being only 17 and dazzled by glamour, caught up in the excitement of Hollywood and the attention of an older man who seemed sophisticated and worldly compared to the restricted life she had been living. The move to California and marriage to DiCicco takes Gloria away from New York society, from the constant reminder of the custody trial, from Gertrude's control. It appears to offer freedom, adult identity, the possibility of being Gloria DiCicco instead of Gloria Vanderbilt, with all that name's heavy associations. But the freedom proves illusory and short-lived. Biographers working from Gloria's later testimony, court records from her divorce proceedings, and her own memoirs describe the marriage as stormy and increasingly abusive. Years later, she will state explicitly that DiCicco was physically violent, that the marriage was characterized by control and intimidation, that she was trapped in a relationship she did not know how to escape. The pattern from her childhood repeats with devastating precision. A powerful older man, a young woman whose money and name confer status, but not actual power, a situation in which her wealth makes her simultaneously valuable and vulnerable. In photographs from this period, carefully selected and published in fan magazines and society pages, the young Mrs. DiCicco appears in sleek Hollywood gowns, her hair styled in the fashion of 1940 starlets, often with a small bouquet or corsage pinned to her shoulder. A floral motif that looks merely decorative in images, but that friends later report was one of her small comforts, a connection to practices from childhood that helped her feel grounded when little else in her life felt secure. The marriage lasts until 1945, ending in divorce after several years of private unhappiness and at least one separation. Legal documents from the divorce proceedings, preserved in California court archives, cite cruelty as grounds, standard language in the era when divorce required fault-based justification, but in this case, apparently referring to genuine mistreatment rather than merely legal convenience. The narrator observes that Gloria's first marriage is simultaneously rebellion against the family control she grew up under and unconscious reenactment of patterns established in childhood. She has fled Gertrude's supervision only to place herself under control of a different powerful figure. She has sought escape from the Vanderbilt name, only to discover that her wealth and family make her attractive to men who want to possess her fortune or status rather than love her as a person. The lesson is brutal. Changing location does not change fundamental vulnerabilities created by childhood trauma, enormous wealth without corresponding power, and a famous name that makes her both valuable and target. By 1945, divorced and in her early 20s, Gloria faced the question of what comes next. She could return to New York, resume some version of the debutante to society wife trajectory that her class expects. Instead, she makes another choice that surprises observers and establishes a pattern that will repeat through her life. She marries again, quickly, to another powerful older man. This time, not a Hollywood agent, but an internationally famous conductor 3 times her age. The choice is not random or impulsive, but reflects deeper patterns about how Gloria understands safety, love, and identity. She has been taught from childhood that she needs protection, that she cannot manage her own life, that powerful men provide shelter and authority. The custody trial reinforced these lessons. Children need adult guardians. Women need male protection. Wealth requires management by others. Her first marriage may have failed, may have been traumatic, but the solution she seeks is not independence, but a better choice of protector. The second marriage, to Leopold Stokowski, will be more publicly prominent, longer lasting, and in some ways more successful than the first. It will produce 2 sons and place Gloria at the center of the international cultural world. But it will also continue the pattern of Gloria defining herself through relationships with older, powerful men, seeking identity and security through marriage, rather than through independent self-creation. The cost of that pattern will take decades to fully reveal itself. In April 1945, at age 21, Gloria Vanderbilt marries Leopold Stokowski, the celebrated conductor, then in his 60s, in a civil ceremony that draws attention from both society writers and music critics. Stokowski, born in London in 1882 to Polish and Irish parents, has become one of the most famous conductors in the world, known for his work with the Philadelphia Orchestra. His film appearances, including Disney's Fantasia, and his reputation for bringing classical music to wider audiences through recordings and innovative programming. The marriage represents a dramatic shift in Gloria's public image and private circumstances. Where Pat DiCicco offered Hollywood glamour and ultimately disappointment, Stokowski provides access to high culture, international reputation, and the kind of serious artistic environment that connects back to her childhood exposure to Gertrude's world. They establish homes in New York and abroad, travel to concerts and festivals, socialize with composers, performers, and cultural figures. Gloria is no longer just a wealthy ornament, but Mrs. Leopold Stokowski, wife of a significant artist. The marriage produces 2 sons, Stan and Christopher, born in 1950 and 1952. Their births represent Gloria's transformation from traumatized heiress to mother herself, though her approach to mothering is inevitably shaped by her own complex childhood. Later interviews suggest she is determined to be present for her children in ways her own mother was not, but that she also struggles with the practicalities of parenting, sometimes relying heavily on nannies and household staff in patterns that echo her own upbringing. The marriage settlement and social coverage of the union emphasize the merging of 2 kinds of prestige: Vanderbilt wealth and old world cultural achievement, American money and European artistic sophistication. This pattern echoes earlier Gilded Age marriages between American heiresses and European aristocrats, the dollar princesses, who traded family fortunes for titles and social position. While Stokowski is not nobility, he represents a different kind of aristocracy, cultural rather than hereditary, based on achievement rather than birth, but providing similar legitimacy and status. By 1955, however, that marriage also ended in divorce. The reasons are complex and never fully public, involving age difference, incompatible lifestyles, Stokowski's demanding career, and perhaps fundamental incompatibilities that both parties were initially willing to overlook but that proved unsustainable over a decade. Legal documents are sealed, public statements are brief and carefully neutral. Gloria moves forward again. In August 1956, less than a year after divorcing Stokowski, Gloria married Sidney Lumet, the acclaimed director then known for live television drama and about to make the transition to feature films with 12 Angry Men. Lumet, born in Philadelphia in 1924, is closer to Gloria's age than either of her previous husbands, and the marriage enters a different social world. Not Hollywood glamour or classical music, but serious cinema, Broadway theater, the intellectually engaged artistic community of 1950s New York. Through these years, Gloria pursues her own artistic education more seriously. She studies acting at the Neighborhood Playhouse, a respected theater school in New York that has trained many prominent actors using techniques derived from Stanislavski and other modern approaches. She continues art training at the Art Students League of New York, one of the city's most significant institutions for training painters and sculptors, working alongside students who are pursuing art as a serious vocation rather than a wealthy hobby. Diary fragments preserved in family papers and passages from her later memoirs suggest that each marriage offered both shelter and a kind of erasure. As Mrs. Stokowski, Mrs. Lumet, she could be someone other than Gloria Vanderbilt, the poor little rich girl, could have identity derived from accomplished men rather than from her own traumatic past. But the borrowed identity came at the cost of suppressing or subordinating her own developing sense of self, her own artistic ambitions, her own need to be something more than someone's wife. The narrator reflects that these alliances are not simply love stories or romantic mistakes. They are social architectures, relationships built on carefully negotiated foundations, involving names, reputations, money, and inherited cultural scripts about who protects whom and who provides identity to whom. Gloria is following patterns established not just in her own childhood, but in generations of women from her class who understood marriage as the primary means of establishing adult identity and social position. The pattern will break, or at least bend significantly, with her fourth and final marriage. But that transformation takes time and self-knowledge that Gloria is still developing through the 1950s and early 1960s, still learning who she is, separate from the men she has married and the roles they have assigned her. In December 1963, Gloria Vanderbilt married Wyatt Emery Cooper, a writer and actor from Mississippi who has worked as both screenwriter and on-screen performer. Cooper, born in 1927, is approximately Gloria's age, a significant departure from the pattern of her previous marriages to much older men. The wedding is small, private, drawing less media attention than her earlier, more spectacular unions. Friends and later commentators note qualitative differences between this marriage and the previous three. Cooper is neither famous conductor nor Hollywood agent nor acclaimed director, but rather a working creative person with serious literary ambitions, someone interested in ideas, conversation, family life. The relationship seems to join two people of similar age and compatible intellectual interests rather than pairing a very young woman seeking protection with an established older man offering status and authority. They have two sons together, Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, born in 1965, and Anderson Hayes Cooper, born in 1967. With these children, Gloria makes conscious efforts to create a different kind of family than the one she experienced, warm, communicative, emotionally available in ways that contrast sharply with her own childhood of nannies, courtrooms, and parental absence. In interviews given decades later, particularly in conversations with Anderson captured in the documentary Nothing Left Unsaid, she describes her determination to be present for her sons, to talk openly about feelings, to avoid the emotional silences and substituted caretakers that characterized her own upbringing. Whether she fully succeeds in creating this different family is complicated by her own unresolved trauma, by Wyatt's struggles with his own health and career frustrations, by the various ways that wealth and celebrity continue to shape their lives, regardless of their intentions. But the effort itself represents significant evolution in Gloria's understanding of family, parenting, and what children actually need from parents. In their New York apartment, documented in photographs from this period, Gloria creates a domestic environment that reflects her own artistic sensibility. She is often shown at a table arranging flowers near her easel, the old childhood habit now transformed into conscious artistic practice. The flower arrangements are no longer just diversions or performances of domestic femininity, but studies in color and form that inform her painting, elements of her creative process that connect aesthetic choices across different media. The marriage to Wyatt Cooper provides Gloria with perhaps the most stable period of her adult life to that point. She paints seriously, exhibits her work, develops relationships in the New York art world as a practitioner rather than merely a wealthy patron. She writes, experimenting with poetry and memoir. She builds friendships based on shared interests rather than social obligation. She mothers her sons with conscious attention to their emotional needs. For roughly 15 years, from their marriage in 1963 until Wyatt's sudden death from heart failure during surgery in January 1978, she experiences something approaching the family life she never had as a child. Wyatt Cooper's death at age 50, while the family is still young, Carter is 12, Anderson only 10, represents a devastating loss that echoes and in some ways surpasses the traumas of Gloria's childhood. In later interviews, she describes the grief as overwhelming, the sense of having finally found stability, only to have it torn away, the fear and rage at losing someone she loved to random medical catastrophe, rather than to anyone's choice or fault. The narrator observes that this marriage did not erase Gloria's past or heal all childhood wounds. Nothing could do that. But it allowed her, briefly, to stage a different family drama of family, where her own childhood was about custody battles and controlled visitation, about love measured and withheld, about children as valuable property to be managed. She and Wyatt created something more emotionally open, less defended, more focused on actual connection than on performance of proper family forms. After Wyatt's death in 1978, Gloria will confront her old loneliness again, will face the question of who she is when not defined by marriage to significant men, and will need to construct an identity based on her own work and choices rather than borrowed from husband status. The process will lead her back to the artistic and commercial pursuits she had been developing alongside her marriages, will push her toward the public phase of her career, where she transforms the Vanderbilt name from burden into brand, where she reclaims the image that was used against her as child and makes it serve her own purposes as adult. From the late 1940s onward, running parallel to and sometimes intersecting with her marriages, Gloria Vanderbilt pursued a career as visual artist and designer. Exhibition catalogs from small New York galleries and occasional major institutions document one-woman shows of her paintings and collages, works that are sometimes dismissed by critics as dilettantish efforts by wealthy amateur, but that represent serious engagement with color, form, and personal expression. She studies at the Art Students League of New York with genuine commitment, working alongside students who are pursuing art as a profession rather than hobby, learning techniques and theory, developing her own aesthetic vocabulary. Her work in this period combines surrealist influences with personal symbolism, creating images that are decorative but also psychologically charged, revealing and concealing simultaneously in ways that parallel her own relationship with public visibility. By the 1970s, particularly after Wyatt Cooper's death left her needing to reimagine her life and identity, Gloria began licensing her artistic designs to commercial ventures. Hallmark Cards reproduces her images on greeting cards and related products, bringing her work into millions of American homes. Bloomcraft, a textile firm, uses her designs for fabrics. These ventures represent her transition from fine artist to commercial designer, from creating for galleries to creating for mass market, a move that some in the art world view as selling out, but that Gloria understands as making her work accessible and, crucially, as building her own fortune rather than simply managing inherited wealth. The breakthrough comes with designer jeans. In 1976, Gloria licensed her name and a distinctive swan logo to Murjani Corporation for a line of fitted, expensive denim jeans aimed at women. The timing is perfect. Denim is transitioning from purely casual wear to fashion statement. Designer labels are becoming important markers of status and style. Baby boomers have money to spend on clothing that signals both casual confidence and sophisticated taste. Marketing campaigns for Gloria Vanderbilt jeans feature Gloria herself, now in her 50s, photographed in tailored blouses and the slim-fitting denim that will make her brand famous. The advertisements are studies in controlled sophistication. She appears poised, elegant, attainable, but aspirational, embodying the idea that ordinary women can purchase a small piece of Vanderbilt glamour through their choice of jeans. In these promotional images, flowers often appear in the background. a vase on a table, an arrangement on a nearby surface, echoing the motif that has followed Gloria from childhood. What once was a child's diversion or emotional management becomes part of a carefully constructed brand image, a visual element that signals refined domesticity even in a commercial context. The jeans are enormously successful, making Gloria wealthy through her own efforts rather than merely through inherited money. At the peak of the brand's popularity in the early 1980s, Gloria Vanderbilt jeans generated hundreds of millions in annual sales. Gloria herself reportedly earns millions in royalties, building a fortune that is hers in ways the trust fund never was. Money she has made through her own choices, licensed from her own name and designs, controlled entirely by her own decisions. Biographers and cultural critics read this phase of Gloria's career as both savvy business move and psychological reclamation. After childhood, in which her fortune and image were weapons in custody battle, after marriages where she was defined primarily through relationship to powerful men, she is now, quite literally, signing her own work, selling her own designs, building wealth from her own labor. The narrator observes that the same social architecture that once used Gloria as pawn has become raw material for her own art and commerce. The Vanderbilt name that was both blessing and curse in childhood is now an asset she deploys strategically. Grace is no longer just performance expected of her, but product she shapes and sells, converting the very thing that constrained her into a source of creative and financial power. Yet, even as she achieves this success, the underlying tensions and traumas remain unresolved. The girl who learned in courtroom to perform composure, who arranged flowers as child's way of creating small order in chaotic life, has become woman who sells image of sophisticated control while continuing to struggle privately with loneliness, loss, and the ongoing work of understanding who she is separate from what she has been told to be. In her later memoirs, and particularly in the HBO documentary Nothing Left Unsaid, produced by her son Anderson Cooper, Gloria will return explicitly to the childhood trauma of the custody trial, to the pattern it established, to what even fame, artistic success, and financial independence could not entirely heal or repair. In the 2010s, seated in her Manhattan apartment with its walls covered in her own paintings and shelves lined with tchotchkes and mementos spanning nearly 90 years of life, Gloria Vanderbilt sits across from her son Anderson Cooper, cameras recording for the documentary Nothing Left Unsaid. The project is Anderson's idea, an attempt to understand his mother more fully, to capture her stories before they are lost, to create a record of her life beyond the headlines and scandal that defined her childhood. Gloria, now in her 90s, speaks with remarkable directness about the custody trial, about losing Dodo, about feeling throughout childhood like she did not truly belong anywhere, but she also revises the public narrative in an important way. I thought the worst thing that had ever happened to me was when I was 9, she says, referring to the custody battle. But that wasn't the worst. The worst is to lose a child. The line is devastating in its precision and revisionism, the famous scandal that newspapers called Trial of the Century. The trauma that supposedly defined her life gets reclassified as preparation for later, more private grief. The suicide of her son Carter Vanderbilt Cooper in 1988 when he was 23 years old. Carter, who had struggled with mental health issues and whom Gloria describes as sensitive and troubled, died after jumping from the terrace of Gloria's 14th floor apartment while she was present in the room, trying to prevent exactly what happened. The loss of Carter represents the culmination of all the losses Gloria has experienced. Her father died before she could know him. Her mother taken by court order. Dodo removed by legal decree. Wyatt dead from heart failure. But losing a child is different, carries weight that none of the other losses quite match, breaks something that cannot be repaired. In discussing it with Anderson, Gloria is simultaneously opening an old wound and insisting that her life cannot be reduced to the custody trial, that the girl who suffered public humiliation in 1934 became a woman who endured far worse in private. The archival photographs displayed throughout the documentary trace transformation across decades. Little Gloria, in starched dresses and carefully set hair, posed for court photographers and society pages. Teenage Gloria in Hollywood glamour shots. Young Mrs. Stokowski at cultural events. Gloria the artist in her studio. Gloria the designer in denim advertisements. Elderly Gloria surrounded by her paintings and memories. The images accumulate without quite cohering into a single narrative. Each one shows Gloria performing a role, inhabiting identity, but none reveals the person beneath all the performances. In one particularly striking moment, Gloria holds a childhood photograph from the 1930s trial period, gazing at the solemn little girl whose life was argued over in open court. The camera lingers on her fingers, tracing the edge of the image, the elderly woman's hand touching the photograph of her child's self, as if the gesture might somehow reach back across time, offer comfort or connection to the girl who had no one to truly protect her. The documentary includes archival footage from the trial period, newspaper headlines screaming, "Poor little rich girl," photographs of Gloria leaving courthouse with Gertrude while reporters shout questions, images of Gloria Morgan dabbing eyes with handkerchief for cameras. The material is familiar from decades of reproduction, but seen in context of Gloria's full life, rather than as isolated scandal, it becomes clearer how much the trial was about adults' needs and conflicts rather than the child's welfare, how Gloria herself was made symbol of competing ideas about motherhood, morality, and meaning of wealth. The narrator reflects that the girl who once learned to sit still under cross-examination has, in the end, told her own story, though even in telling it, she cannot entirely escape the patterns established in childhood. She has granted interviews, written memoirs, appeared in documentaries, but always there remains a sense of performance, of showing what can be shown while protecting what must remain private. The custody trial taught her that vulnerability is dangerous, that authentic feeling can be used against you, that survival requires maintaining certain defenses even when telling the truth. Gloria Vanderbilt died on 17th of June 2019 at age 95 at her home in Manhattan with Anderson at her side. Obituaries in major newspapers emphasized her multifaceted career: artist, designer, author, actress, entrepreneur. Most mention the childhood custody trial, but as biographical detail rather than defining event, recognition that her life extended far beyond that trauma, that she had built identities and achievements that were her own rather than merely reactions to childhood wounds. The trial made her symbol of wealth's failures to protect, of Depression-era anxieties about morality and motherhood, of children caught in adult conflicts. Her later work insisted on the person beneath the symbol, the woman who painted and designed and wrote and mothered, who experienced joy and grief and creativity and loss in ways that could not be reduced to childhood scandal or public image. The documentary Nothing Left Unsaid closes not with dramatic conclusions or neat resolutions, but with black and white press photograph from 1934. 10-year-old Gloria leaving the courthouse, her small gloved hand held firmly in Aunt Gertrude's larger one, her face turned slightly toward the side where a florist's cart sits at the curb. Its display of cut flowers briefly visible behind the crowd of reporters and photographers. The image is familiar, reproduced countless times over decades, but in this context, at the end of Gloria's own narration of her life, it carries different weight. The narrator does not comment. The photograph speaks its own language about childhood performance under adult surveillance, about flowers as both beauty and burden, about the gap between public image and private experience that no amount of later revelation can entirely bridge. Somewhere in museum archives or family storage, that photograph lies next to trial transcripts that documented every day of testimony, trust documents that tracked every dollar spent on the child's maintenance, marriage certificates from her 4 unions, exhibition catalogs from her art shows, fashion advertisements featuring her name and face, memoirs in her own voice attempting to make sense of it all. Together, these documents form a quiet record of how Gilded Age fortune shaped 20th century life, how grace functioned as both shelter and constraint, how one girl became the first symbol and eventually person in her own right. The trial transcripts are legal documents, supposedly objective records of testimony and judicial decisions, but reading them decades later reveals how much they are also fictions, narratives constructed by lawyers, performed by witnesses, shaped by cultural anxieties about women and wealth and propriety. The truth of Gloria's childhood exists somewhere between the lines, in what was said and what was carefully not said, in performances that were simultaneously genuine feeling and strategic calculation. The photographs, similarly, show and conceal. Every image of young Gloria was made with the audience in mind: newspaper readers, society matrons, judges evaluating her welfare. She was taught to pose, to arrange herself decoratively, to create the impression of a well cared for child, even when she felt abandoned. The adult Gloria continued this practice with more sophistication, but the same fundamental awareness that image and reality need not align, that presenting an acceptable surface is survival skill. The flower arranging that began as a child's occupation and became artistic practice represents this contradiction perfectly. Flowers are beautiful, decorative, associated with femininity and domestic grace, exactly what society wants women to be. But flowers are also living things being shaped to human purposes, cut from their roots and arranged into pleasing compositions that bear no relationship to how they grew naturally. The metaphor is almost too obvious, but that does not make it less true. Gloria's later success as artist and designer, her transformation of Vanderbilt name from burden into brand, represents genuine achievement and agency. She built wealth through her own work, created images that expressed her own sensibility, made choices about how to live and what to value. But even these achievements exist in the context of the childhood that shaped her. She understood image management because she had been managed as image. She knew how to perform grace because she had been drilling and performing it. She could design a desirable lifestyle because she had spent a lifetime observing the gap between appearing to live well and actually living well. The narrator observes that the arrangement remaining for history to study is not simple or single, but multiple and layered. The careful placing of a girl in courtroom testimony, the crafting of image through society photographs and fashion campaigns, the construction of meaning through memoirs and interviews. Gloria Vanderbilt spent 95 years arranging and rearranging these elements, trying to make sense of what happened to her, trying to claim authorship of life that began as something done to her rather than by her. The flowers in the 1934 photograph have long since withered, the actual roses Gloria touched that morning before court surviving only in memory and image. But the pattern they represent endures. The requirement that women, especially wealthy women, make themselves decorative while hiding the effort required, that they perform grace while concealing cost, that they present beauty while managing pain. Gloria Vanderbilt's legacy is complex: artist and heiress, mother and daughter, performer and person, symbol and self. She was a poor little rich girl who became a wealthy woman through her own work, a child who lost custody battle but eventually claimed custody of her own story. She arranged flowers throughout her life, in childhood homes and Manhattan apartments, in paintings and commercial designs, each arrangement an attempt to create beauty and order in life that often felt chaotic and controlled by others. The final image is not triumph or tragedy, but simply completion, a long life fully lived, documented extensively, understood partially. The questions the custody trial posed: who loved her? Where did she belong? What did she need? Were never definitively answered because they were framed incorrectly, asked about wrong things. The real question, which Gloria spent a lifetime addressing, was simpler and harder. Who was she, separate from fortune and fame and family dysfunction? The flowers remain metaphor and memory, decorative and profound, beautiful arrangement covering complicated roots. History continues to study them, seeing both the surface grace and the hidden thorns, the aesthetic achievement and the personal cost, the public image, and the private child who once stood on tiptoe to arrange white roses on gray Monday morning before everything changed.